me the way to make things right.
Coming up, millions of people spend 60 minutes doing something positive for the planet to raise awareness about environmental damage and increasingly extreme weather.
It's a heat wave that we have in these days, during these days. Maybe today will be rain, I don't know, I hope so.
A mountain village in one of the most remote regions comes up with an innovative way to collect fresh water, and one of the planet's most influential animal rights networks drops a hard-to-watch series online. Secret cameras reveal the ugly reality behind beauty and drug manufacturing.
What do you think is the root cause for this inability to empathize with a living creature that's suffering and to experiment on it anyway?
So a child is taught from perhaps the age of 12 that it's okay to look at animals in this way.
Just 2 degrees is on. Now.
I am at a loss for words after looking at just 4 episodes of the docuseries.
Show me the way to make things right.
Every year, for 1 hour, millions of people around the world switch off non-essential lights to draw attention to the climate emergency. Earth Hour is organized by the World Wildlife Fund to encourage people across the world to take action to protect the planet. On March 23rd, more than 190 countries took part in the event. A year earlier, the equivalent of 410,000 hours or 46 years worth of electricity was saved during Earth Hour.
From the Sydney Opera House to the London Eye, from Kenya to Colombia, landmarks, homes, and businesses across the world flipped the switch for an hour to spread a message of conservation and sustainability. Earth Hour was born in Australia when the World Wildlife Fund began searching for ways to engage with Australians on environmental issues. They came up with a coordinated worldwide effort to reduce electricity consumption. Participants all will turn off non-essential lights in offices, businesses, and homes between 8:30 and 9:30 in the evening. The inaugural Earth Hour took place in 2007, with 35 countries and 400 cities participating. Now it is a global event, with the World Wildlife Fund calling it the largest global grassroots movement in support of the environment. There's a reason why the event is held in late March. Around this time, the vernal equinox occurs, which means sunset times align in both hemispheres, creating a strong visual display for the Lights Out event. Some environmentalists criticize Earth Hour for holding individuals responsible for climate change and letting the fossil fuel companies and politicians off the hook. But Earth Hour has inspired governments and businesses. For example, Argentina used the 2013 Earth Hour campaign to help pass a Senate bill to protect 3.4 million hectares of marine area. And in 2023, the collective efforts of participants prevented more than 500,000 kilograms of CO2 from being released into the atmosphere.
It was a somber Earth Hour in Bolivia, which is recovering from flash floods that killed at least 50 people. The South American nation has been in the grip of more frequent and lethal climate disasters. I spoke with Fernanda Gutierrez about how Bolivia is responding to extreme weather.
Let me just start by extending our condolences to what's been happening in Bolivia. We know there's a state of emergency declared this month in March, but since January, when the rainy season started, there have been 50 deaths, I think. What's the current state of those parts of the country that were affected by the heavy rains and floods?
Oh, thank you so much for the condolences. Well, it's really sad. Well, right now it's been over 50 deaths. And for example, the house of a colleague is actually flooding. So it's really sad. Right now there is a departmental emergency, so everyone is acting on it. And we just hope for the best, and we expect that the rain stops and everything just goes well. But it's really sad. And for example, the other day, a girl messages us saying that a friend died, and she wanted to speak on the Earth Hour about this and how the climate change is just making all these sad events. So it's just really sad.
You know, when we see heavy flooding that we've seen, I'm not sure whether that's the case in Bolivia, but generally trees that are on mountain slopes help prevent heavy flooding. One op-ed writer in the Mongabay wrote, quote, while food insecurity and a wavering economy require immediate action, the economic over-reliance on the extraction or cutting down of natural resources is pushing Bolivia's forests towards a potential tipping point. What is the WWF's perspective on deforestation in the country?
WWF expectation is that we have zero deforestation by 2030. We're working on it with indigenous communities, with local governments, with the people, because as you say, the forest is really important, and if we continue to deforest the forest, we are going to continue to see these occurrences as such as flooding, as drought, and the food security, because as you know, the local communities, they depend on the forest. So WWF is really working on it, trying to stop deforestation. It's our main focus right now.
With that in mind, what are Bolivia's plans for Earth Hour this year?
So Bolivia is divided basically into the mountains, the valleys, and the Amazon, the Chiquitania forest, the Pantanal, and we are having events in all these regions. Each region has its own problematics, its own problems. So it's interesting to see how people from each region wants to talk about in Earth Hour. For example, right now in the Andes, the mountain part, they're having the heavy rains, the flooding, and they are focusing Earth Hour on that topic. In the case where I live in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, we have the forest fires, we have the drought, so people is talking about water crisis. They see Earth Hours as a platform, they see hope in Earth Hour, because sometimes they feel that they are not seen, they are not here. So Earth Hour for Bolivia is really important because they see hope in Earth Hour. They see Earth Hour as a platform to talk about the problems we are having in Bolivia. We have the drought, we have the forest fires, we have the water crisis. So they see this hope to express their feelings on Earth Hour. Right now, we expect to move around 10,000 volunteers all around Bolivia. And that's really special for us because it's not just a WWF activity, it's an everyone activity.
There was a record-breaking heat wave in Paraguay with temperatures topping 43 degrees Celsius. Meteorologists link the heat to the overabundance of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
You know, I can see that you're sweating a little. Is it really hot in Paraguay now?
It's really, really hot in Paraguay. Here I like 43 Celsius degree. It's like I think that in Fahrenheit it will be 110. It's not normal. It's it's like the new normal, you know. It's weird, but yeah. It's a heat wave that we have in these days, during these days. Maybe today will be rain. I don't know. I hope so, truly.
What are the WWF's plans in Paraguay for Earth Hour?
In Paraguay, we are going to be part of the Asunciónico, the biggest music festival in Paraguay. We are created a presentation, really a representation of a natural corridor in support of Jaguar as part of Paraguay More Jaguar campaign. The event starts today and runs until March 21st. This initiative seeks to preserve the last population of jaguars through action that have positive impact on society. Let's imagine this, that the jaguar and other species are drivers that need to travel from one place to another to find food, shelter, or companions. Natural corridors give these drivers the safe and a structured path to move between different natural areas. For us, this is crucial because it helps maintain the biodiversity of animals and plants in different locations and prevent them from being trapped in small areas and may not be sufficient survival.
One of the many ways you can spend Earth Hour is at the park, or on a hike, or just hanging out at a wildlife sanctuary. And many would agree the air around forested areas just seems a lot cleaner. The UK city of Manchester, for one, is looking to expand its natural habitat. Local authorities have been working with Ordnance Survey, which is a mapping agency, to create a network of green corridors that will help protect wildlife and make sure species like great crested newts, farmland birds and invertebrates can move around more easily. To better understand Manchester's goals, I spoke with John Kimmance, the Managing Director of Ordnance Survey.
John, just set the stage for us by talking about what is the UK's #1 climate challenge and how Manchester is playing a role to mitigate the overall effects.
Okay, I don't think I can call out a #1 climate challenge, but one of the challenges that we've got to face is around the actual degradation of the natural environment and actually the importance of rebalancing the ecology in different geographies in order to create more green space, which obviously in its own right supports the climate challenge.
And Manchester, what is Manchester doing to work on its own goals?
Yeah, so Manchester is one of a number of authority areas across Britain that are addressing, actually as a government statute, to reverse the decline of the ecosystem by 2030. And they're looking at that at a local level by trying to understand the information they've got in the geography. So, for example, what level of green space, what level of farmland, woodland, open parks, etc., is there within the Greater Manchester area. And actually, by doing the analysis, it's actually quite surprising because a lot of people feel that that area is a very urban area, but actually 2/3 of it is actually green, which is fantastic, and it provides a really good basis from which to improve.
That's a pretty big number, 2/3. Going to more detail in terms of what you plan on doing to look at the space to make it even better.
Okay, so what Ordnance Survey does is that we've got a very large database that covers the whole of Britain, which has got about 500 million features or elements of the land within that. And it allows people to sort of go and take the bits that they're interested in. So in this case, the ecologists within Greater Manchester are taking out the relevant bits of geography that are important to them. So things like hedges, parklands, the farmlands, etc. And that allows them to build up a picture of what they've got in that particular geography, in this case, Greater Manchester, and then try and work out that if I want to try and join some of these geographies together, so for example, there might be a very rare species of newt, or there may be a particular type of lichen or fungi in a particular area. How do I create an environment that allows that area to join through green spaces to other parts of the location as well? And so our data allows you to do that at a very, very micro sort of local level, right the way through to a national level.
One last question on what's been happening across Europe. We've been seeing farmers protesting for a while now, not just in the UK, obviously across the entire region. And this is as the entire bloc, well, you're no longer part of the bloc, but I know they're trying to keep farmers happy while attain their own climate goals. What is would you say the UK's agriculture industry is in part responsible for the decline in Manchester's natural habitats, either directly or indirectly?
No, I don't think that is the case, actually. I think there are two different challenges. So you've got the urban geography, which is in this case Greater Manchester, and that needs to sit alongside and coexist with the rural environment. And farming plays a really important role in essentially custodian of the green space. And certainly here, and I'm sure it's the same across Europe, farmers are now incentivized to improve the sort of biodiversity and the access to that land, because obviously it's very important for public health. Actually, people have to have access to land, fresh air. The environment. It's been proven to improve people's health outcomes as well.
Let's talk about Kyrgyzstan, where 4,000 meters above sea level glaciers can tower at a height of about 12 meters at the height of winter. But warming temperatures this year have reduced their size considerably. It's affected freshwater access to villagers who've come up with a cool way to keep it chill just a bit longer.
In the Tian Shan mountains of Kyrgyzstan, a mountain village is battling the climate crisis on a different scale.
Глобальных потеплений по всему миру, это, конечно, не оставляет Среднюю Азию тоже. В Средней Азии мы находимся тоже в середине где-то. И поэтому с каждым годом у нас грунтовая вода уменьшается, родники высыхаются. И из-за этого у нас проблемы с пастбищем.
It's a matter of life and death. Agriculture is the main source of income and food for villagers here. Water allows them to grow grain for bread and sustain their livestock, a source of milk and butter. But thanks to increasing drought, glaciers are shrinking without enough rain and snow to replenish them. With thirsty pastures, farmers have been forced to adapt. So they've built glaciers, artificial ones. First, pipes are used to redirect water from the peaks of Tian Shan. During winter, the water freezes, forming a huge ice tower, and the mountain of ice slowly melts in warmer months, providing villagers with regular fresh water for irrigation and personal use. This one, 5 meters tall and 20 meters long, was twice as tall at the height of winter. It's already seen success at watering crops.
Построили, то есть воду провели, и сейчас мы хотим посмотреть, как она будет влиять и действовать на скот.
Each artificial glacier costs about $6,200 to make, but it's worth the price.
Remember when you were in school and you were required to cut open a frog to study its anatomy? Well, that frog was one of scores of millions of animals used in medical and curiosity-based experiments that year and every year. Many of us have done it. We simply did what we were told in school. Well, the people for the ethical treatment of animals, PETA, has released a mini-series on YouTube called The Failed Experiment. It captures the bleak reality for animals used in chemical, drug, food and cosmetics tests. This just might be the hardest to watch example of what some animals go through to put products for human use on the shelves.
When there were concerns about products or procedures that might have injured human beings, it was decided they needed to be tested in some way, and the easy way to do that was to use animals. And because other ways weren't looked at, it became the default system. Let's try it on an animal. That came to be the accepted way of doing it. We know from statistics provided by the Food and Drug Administration that at least 92% of all medications that test safe and effective in animal trials fail when they get to human clinical trials. In any other field, a 92% failure rate would be completely unacceptable.
There's a world of difference between the various species, even between a mouse and a rat. So you know you're going to get extremely varied results that you can't rely on when you try to apply those to human beings.
We called Kathy, PETA's Vice President for Laboratory Investigations, to discuss whether animals are truly needed for medical experiments.
All the most recent scientific evidence from, I'd say, the last decade of studies showed that it's really not essential at all. And in many cases, it's holding us back because the reliance on a model that is so inefficient, the reliance on tests on animals, which are not getting us to the next stage of viable clinical trials, means that a lot of money and a lot of time is not going into what might bring us farther forward. And now we do have so many of those non-animal methods that could be working.
What do you think is the root cause for this inability to empathize with a living creature that's suffering and to experiment on it anyway?
The root cause of the attitude toward animals, I think, is something that is, at least in the United States and in many places in the world, is drummed into us when we're still children in school. In the US and in many countries, dissection, for example, is commonplace. So a child is taught from perhaps the age of 12 that it's okay to look at animals in this way. It's okay to see animals as tools for what we can do. And then it goes on from there. Kids go to college, they're in biology classes, they then get into graduate school where the expectation in the biomedical sciences is that you will test on animals.
Kathy, what do you think
is the US's government's view, though, on animal testing? Why does funding continue?
It's really a paradigm that our funding agency, the National Institutes of Health, is clinging to against all evidence. And I think that comes partly from a system that is set up improperly and partly from lobbying by the animal experimenters themselves. But if you look at how the system works, when somebody wants to get funded from the US government, they will submit a proposal for a study or a set of experiments, and they'll apply for funding. The review committee for that proposal in our research is 90% animal experimenters. So on the one hand, they have some expertise in their field, but on the other, they only know what they know. And so they're much more inclined to approve animal studies than not. And then we do have so many people at universities here. Most of their funding comes from the US government. They know it's easier to get published if you're doing an animal experiment than if you're trying something a little bit new or different, especially if you're not familiar with it. So it's a situation that perpetuates itself because we are having trouble getting the people in charge of the decision-making at the journals, at the university level, at the government level, to move away and embrace modern science. I think the hope lies in our Congress. Members of Congress do realize it's not working, and they do want to see change, both for ethical reasons and for scientific reasons.
One of the episodes of the failed experiment looks at maternal deprivation and psychopathology experiments with baby monkeys, which I've got to say was particularly hard to watch, even though there was no blood involved. Can you define what curiosity-based experiments are?
The curiosity-based experiments make up the majority of what's funded by the US government, and they are studies that don't even pretend, well, sometimes I will say they do now pretend, but really they have nothing to do with finding a treatment or a cure for a human being or for human disease. They look at a particular aspect of one part of the brain. The maternal deprivation studies that we're seeing around the country with infant monkeys, these are the same experiments that were done by Harry Harlow at the University of Wisconsin back in the 1950s and 60s. But what they do now is they look at a little part of the brain. They take the baby monkeys away from their mothers, and for example, an experimenter at Harvard distorts their vision in some way. She puts goggles on them that create a perpetual strobe light effect. And then after a year of that, she kills them and dissects their brain to see what effect it has had on their brain. And then she publishes a paper. Nothing to do with human vision. She has learned perhaps something about a bit of a monkey brain, and that's it. That's as far as it goes. That's what we mean by curiosity base. And they will tell you this is the foundation of future research that could help humans. But evidence shows it never goes on to do that. These papers are rarely cited compared to the non-animal papers in future studies that could help people.
Before I let you go, Kathy, PETA has been so instrumental in bringing this issue to light over the years and decades. But considering that animal testing is still legal across the US, how close would you say PETA is to ending this once and for all?
We have a big battle ahead of us. I think there's no question about that. But I also think we're at a tipping point. It's difficult to say how many years this is going to take, but we're beginning to see real movement on the part of legislators and certainly by the public that wants things to change. Last year, we were able to pass what we call the FDA Modernization Act, which gives our agency in charge of approving new medications the authority to approve those medications without animal tests. That's a big breakthrough. The National Institutes of Health has had within it a new division mandated by Congress that should expedite cures for humans. And they do that not through animal studies, but through non-animal studies. So I think we're at a very important juncture in history. We have our own research modernization deal that was developed by our scientists, which lays out a strategy for eliminating animal tests. And we're seeing purchase on that around the world. The European Parliament has asked the European Commission to come up with a plan to phase out animal studies. So while I think the battle is still big, and we're some years away from seeing the end of animal experiments, We are now getting acknowledgement from the scientific community, from the public, and from Congress that it's got to change.
That's our show. The failed experiment is pretty tough to look at. You can see the 6-part series on YouTube. I'll leave you with some of those scenes.
Anybody with common sense knows that animals feel pain. They show altruism. They have senses of humor. And even though many people, half or more than half, oppose the use of animals for experimentation, it has put roots down in our system that have to be yanked out.
Indoctrination is part of medical training. We're always looking up to people who are better trained and better experienced than ourselves. And when those people had used animals, there was always an inertia, I think, to follow in that direction.
We see animals used in very painful experiments with no pain relief at all.
Studies have shown that when they see the doorknob turning on the laboratory door, their pulse quickens.